what to do with Trey Lance. Do you stash him as the backup on this team, or does his trade value drop the longer he sits? If the Niners decide that Brock Purdy is the one for them, does it make sense to keep Trey Lance just in case as a high-level backup, or does it hurt them to keep him on the bench not playing indefinitely? What do you think?
I mean, just to answer the question, I think 100% the longer he sits, the trade value drops. I mean, the fact the way that his two seasons have already played out, it's dropped significantly. The talk going into this offseason was if he was in this last year's draft, he would have been the number one player off the draft.
Right.
And I agree. I think we all agreed with that.
Mm-hmm.
However, now we go into this draft, there's 2, possibly 3 high coveted quarterbacks that are coming out, and he's now gotten injured. And so if he's sitting next year, and it's not because there's a veteran there, and it's because there's a quarterback who came in the league a year after him, was the last pick in the draft, and took his starting job, where's the value at? I mean, there's almost no value there. So if that is the case, I think you would have to keep him as the backup because, as we know, quarterbacks do get injured in this system. They've been down to their 4th quarterback or 3rd quarterback, I think 4 years since Shanahan has been here, and it almost happened again last year. So, yeah, I think just having both quarterbacks is probably a lot more valuable than whatever pick that you would get for him at the trade deadline next year or whatever that looks like. So I think yes. The obvious answer is the longer he sits, the more that value goes down.
So here's my problem. And I originally was against trading Lance, but it seems to me that if the Niners decide Brock's their guy, and they haven't decided that yet, there's the whole playoffs that have to go. But let's say he wins the Super Bowl and he's freaking Kurt Warner and he's great. And they're like, you know what? We didn't see it coming, but he's our guy. Trey, you might be someone else's guy, but you're not ours. What you are now is our backup. You could get a backup quarterback for cheaper. And if that's all his value is to you, then you can start, like, is he worth more to you in a trade? And my question is, if you trade him this year with 2 years left on his rookie deal before the 5th-year option, is he worth more than if you sit him for another year?
Yes.
And then try to – so that's what I'm saying. Like, if you traded him this year, you might get a second and then a conditional pick that could be a first in the future. If you don't and you make him a backup for another year and you trade him the year after that with 1 year left on his deal, like you're getting very little for him.
Yeah.
And if you're just concerned about having a backup, like, dude, you could trade him and draft another quarterback who's a backup or sign a guy who's a backup. I don't know. I just feel like if you feel super confident in Brock, it not only would it be the right thing to do for Trey, it'd probably be the right thing to do for your franchise is to get just to salvage it. That being said, you know the Niners won't do that. They're not going to trade Trey. Let me make that real clear. They're not going to trade Trey Lance. They're not the kind of team that sells low or admits a mistake. I mean, look what they did with Jimmy Garoppolo forever. So they're not going to do it. But I think it's worth talking about if Brock's the guy, what are we really doing with Trey? What are we really doing here? He's the backup.
The thing.
Okay.
I think, okay, obviously it's better for Trey if he's going to be the backup that they trade him. I get that. I think it's better for the franchise if they keep him. And here's why. Let's say you trade him for a second. He goes to the Saints, the Colts, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh shit, he is going to be a top 10 quarterback. He's everything that you thought he was going to be coming out of the draft. Maybe Purdy doesn't play great. Like that, there is that scenario that could happen, right? Like, let's say Purdy doesn't play all that great. The book's out on him. He has an off year. Okay. So how do you really look? Because you wasted all these picks on him. Then you traded him for pennies on the dollar, and he's exactly who you thought he was. You just got impatient, and the guy that you kept isn't what you thought he is. Now, how bad does it look? I just
and that's right there why they won't trade him.
Worst case scenario.
It's not going to happen.
It's not worth
they're not going to trade him. They're not because that could happen right there. But it's like if you have the conviction of we're sold on Brock, then okay, then make a move, because if you need to see more and you keep sitting on the fence, and you finally decide that Brock's your guy next year, and then you decide to trade Trey, well, you just lost value. Yeah. But maybe whatever value you lose, from that year, maybe it's worth it to just gain more evidence. Maybe it's, okay, he goes from getting, a second and a first to a second and a third, but at least we gave ourselves another year to really know for sure that Brock was our guy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's worth it. Like call it paying for confirmation. You can look at it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair thing to do. I mean, again, is it the right thing to do for Trey? No, but unfortunately, this is a business. You do own his rights.
It's true.
And you're paying him the money to be on your roster. So I don't think there's any harm in saying, okay, it's great, regardless of how these playoffs go. Let's say, Purdy balls out, they win the Super Bowl. Maybe you do want to see it for another season. I mean, it's fair. Players have done this before. Again, we've talked about the Nick Foles. We've talked about the Flacco. I'm not saying it would be that, but it could be. So why not at least, hey, we've got the guy here, or a guy that we thought was the guy. Maybe he's not. We think it's Purdy, but we're also not sure. Maybe the book's out on him next year. I don't know. We just want to see it for another year. Go out and prove it. We're going to give you the keys. As long as you can continue to do it, then Trey's out of here, whatever. But I think that's totally fair to do as an organization.
Yeah, and it's interesting. As long as you keep Trey here, it keeps the pressure on Brock. You're not the starter. I mean, you're the starter today. As long as you keep it going, like you're that pitcher in the game who's throwing a perfect game, so we can't take you out.
Yeah.
But we never thought you'd be throwing a perfect game. So keep going. But at a certain point, we're sort of expecting this to all come back to earth, maybe. So, yeah, I mean, keeping Trey there sends the message to Brock, like, we're not anointing you. You got to keep doing what you're doing. Maybe it brings out the best in both of them. Maybe it does. Maybe this is a good dynamic.
For sure. I think it definitely could. But also, let's look at how this organization handled Trey. Did they make it easy on Trey? I mean, sure, everybody's like, well, he was just given the job. He never earned it. It's like, well, yeah, but even when they gave him the job, they still brought back the guy that everybody wanted to play. So did they really fully give it to him? No. So why would you then in turn make it easy for the next guy? That's what they've shown. That's how they handle quarterbacks. And quite frankly, I think Jimmy probably could have benefited from being pushed and not being given the job the way he was. So, yeah, I think it does bring the best out. And I think for Brock Purdy, who's on this inexpensive contract, yes, he plays well, wins the Super Bowl, whatever. I think that it's totally fair to have somebody behind him that he knows that they like and is like, well, I got to continue to earn it every week. I mean, I'm still Mr. Irrelevant. I think having that mentality brings the best out of him. I don't think that there's anything wrong in doing that.
Well, it's working so far. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing to think about. And again, if Brock Purdy loses this week, then you're not anointing him the franchise quarterback and trading Trey Lance. And all of a sudden you're thinking about maybe the whole Brock Purdy thing was a mirage. Maybe Trey Lance is the guy going forward. Who knows? I guess we'll find out.